Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm the following events? By midday yesterday, Senator Cash told the Senate 5 times her office was not aware of imminent police raids before they began, but at 6:10 p.m. Alice Workman of BuzzFeed reported that journalists had received a leak about the raids from Senator Cash's office, and at 7:30 p.m, realising that the truth had been exposed, Senator Cash finally admitted she'd misled the Senate.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, thank you, Mr Speaker. What I can confirm is that Senator Cash defends the interests of trade union members in a way the Leader of the Opposition never did. She defends them. She defends them. Mr Speaker, let's look at this bastion of advocacy for the members of the AWU. This is what he said at the Royal Commission. He said, Mr Speaker, this is the Leader of the Opposition, it's perfectly consistent with the tradition of the trade union movement to have services provided by unions paid for by employers. Well, regrettably, it is, Mr Speaker, and one of the services provided by unions to employers is trading away their penalty rates. That's what they get paid for, Mr Speaker. Example after example. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, over $1 million,
Bendigo and Griffith are both
to the AWU, paid to the AWU by employers when the Leader of the Opposition was the Secretary. And, Mr Speaker, one payment after another from Tees John Holland, ACI Glass, Chiquita Mushrooms. Well, that really worked out well for the members, didn't it? Mr Speaker, Huntsman Chemicals, it's a long list. And one payment after another was found by the Royal Commission to have no benefit for members and indeed to compromise the interest of the members because it compromised the ability of the union to represent them. Now, what we have done is pass legislation to prevent those corrupt payments being made, to prevent secret payments being made. And the Labor Party,
the member for Ballarat is warned.
They shouted and yelled there. They hated it. They thought there was nothing worse than allowing members to know when the employer was actually paying money to their union. And the fact is, Mr Speaker, the fact is that what the Senator Cash has done is she has ensured that the standards of integrity, impartiality are applied to the union movement. That's what she has done, and in a way that the Leader of the Opposition never did. Trading away penalty rates, taking money from employers, Mr Speaker, that was the pattern, and that is coming to an end because of legislation we passed and they opposed.
The member for Bonner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on actions taken by the government to support Australian workers, including putting downward pressure on power prices?
Members on my left, the Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. And Mr Speaker, every policy of my government is focused on delivering more investment and more jobs. And we have seen that delivered in the last year, 371,500 new jobs, 85% of them full-time. The longest run of monthly job creation in 23 years. Jobs and growth is not just a slogan, it is an outcome. It's an outcome. And Mr Speaker, if you want to see the parallel universe the Labor Party dwells in, it's not just one where it's legitimate for unions to take backhanders for employers to trade away penalty rates. That's one, but there's another interesting element. we have the member for McMahon talking about the need for inclusive growth. Inclusive growth. Labor does not have one policy that would encourage one business to invest $1 or hire one employee. And we say, Mr Speaker, that we support inclusive growth, and what we mean by inclusion is that people get included in the workforce. They actually get employment. They get the opportunity to get ahead. And Mr Speaker, it's not just that Labor wants to hit Australians with $150 billion more in taxes. It's not just that Labor wants to jack up the taxes on small businesses and medium businesses, like the bakery I was at with the Minister for Energy earlier in the week, started by a couple, Nick and Louise, as so many businesses are, building it up from their retained earnings. Labor's message to them, they've got two messages. One, your tax is going to go up, so you'll have less to invest, and two, your energy costs are going to go up. And Mr Speaker, the honourable members opposite, I'm sure, would realise, I know there's a great interest in meat pies and the way in which they're delivered by some opposite. I'm sure they'd realise that energy is a very large part of the cost of a bakery. So, Mr Speaker, what Labor offers is this: more expensive, less reliable energy and higher taxes. What does that mean? It means one thing: less investment, less employment, less opportunities. And what the member for McMahon and his leader should think about very carefully is you can't have inclusive growth without growth. You can't have inclusive growth without jobs. Everything we're doing supports growth and jobs. Everything Labor does undermines it.
It's a minister warned. That's what it is. The Minister for the Environment and Energy is warned. The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the Prime Minister's answer yesterday. Can the Prime Minister confirm the Employment Minister and her senior media advisor, who has now resigned for leaking details of imminent raids to the media, attended his question time briefing yesterday? At what time did the meeting take place? Did it take place in his personal office? And who else was present, including but not limited to ministers, MPs and members of the Prime Minister's office?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition is not going to do a very good impersonation of Perry Mason today. Mr Speaker, I'm not. She may embark on a fishing expedition, but, Mr Speaker, I repeat what I said yesterday, that the Minister for Employment assured me she did not advise any journalists about the raid, and that is precisely what she has said in the Senate during estimates.
The member for Lingiari will cease interjecting. The member for Boothby has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. I referred the Treasurer to data which reveals that Adelaide power prices increased by more than twice the national average over the September quarter. Would the Treasurer outline why it is crucial to have a national approach to energy security and affordability, and is he aware of any alternative approaches?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her question. And she makes reference to those September quarter figures for inflation and the impact of electricity prices. She would also be aware that electricity prices for Adelaide through the year, over the past year, 24.3% up through the year. I'm asked about what the comparisons are to other cities. I'm happy to oblige the member. This is more than 1.5 times the rate of increase in Sydney, almost 3 times the rate of increase in Melbourne, almost 7 times the increase in Brisbane, and 27 times the rate of increase in Hobart, Mr Speaker. And the member of Port Adelaide thinks somehow South Australia is a leader on energy prices. The only thing they're leading on is ruining the energy market and ruining the household budgets of South Australian families, Mr Speaker. This week the Productivity Commission also confirmed that South Australia experienced the most volatility in wholesale prices, with the highest number of price spikes of any state, 610, between January of 2013 and August of 2016. The member for Boothby, and I think most of South Australians, except for the Premier and maybe the member for Port Adelaide, understand why this is happening in South Australia. And it's because of the irresponsible energy policies of the South Australian Labor government, who have put unrealistic renewable energy targets ahead of affordability for families and reliability for the supply of energy to businesses, Mr Speaker. That's the trade-off they've made. And, Mr Speaker, we can't allow the Labor experiment in South Australia, which has failed and continue to fail, to infect the rest of the national energy market in Australia. And what the recommendation of the COAG-appointed Independent Energy Security Board has said is we have to go forward in one national direction together. And that direction is the National Energy Guarantee that provides certainty, Mr Speaker, to increase investment in new energy supply, to provide households and business with the reliability that they deserve, savings of up to $115 per year, and acting to ensure we meet our emissions reduction targets. That's what the National Energy Guarantee delivers, and it's time for the Labor Party to get on board, Mr Speaker, with the National Energy Guarantee, to ensure that we have bipartisanship in this place that means we can move as one entire nation, Mr Speaker, to move in the direction that households and businesses demand of this parliament and demand of state and territory governments all around the country, Mr Speaker. Labor knows, as the Shadow Treasurer knows, that their policies in the 50% RET will force up prices by at least $192 per year, Mr Speaker. And if he wants to be very lippy about this topic, Mr Speaker, maybe you'll get a question this time today, because he hasn't had one in a while.
The member for Gorton has the call.
Thanks very much, Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister expect Australians to believe the Employment Minister's office watched the minister mislead the Senate 5 times before midday yesterday but didn't say a thing? The senior media advisor, who has now resigned, attended the Prime Minister's question time briefing with the minister but said nothing, and the advisor then heard the Prime Minister ask twice about the matter during question time but still did nothing.
Members on both sides, the Prime Minister has the call.
Making things up. Just making things up.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. And, Mr Speaker, he's addressed a number of questions to the media advisor concerned, who has properly resigned after a very, very wrong, improper act of indiscretion, and he was wrong to do what he has admitted to, but he was right to resign.
The member for Wakefield will leave under 94A.
Mr Speaker, I want to draw honourable members' attention in the context of the remarks made yesterday by the member for Gorton, and indeed some very intemperate remarks by the member for Whitlam just before question time, to a statement from the Australian Federal Police Commissioner, Andrew Colvin. And he says, this is what Commissioner Colvin says. He says, the AFP requires the ongoing assistance and support of the public
to serve
the community.
Will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Gorton.
Speaker, on relevance, I did not ask a question about the statement of the Federal Police.
I asked about his seat. The member for Gorton will resume his seat. The member for Gorton is warned. He has a habit of ignoring me when I ask him to resume his seat. It is not an opportunity in a point of order to rant and rave across the dispatch box when you do not have the call. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Commissioner Andrew Colvin notes that the AFP has this week been the subject of commentary and innuendo regarding its independence and the ability of AFP members to carry out their work objectively and without political interference. He says that the AFP requires the ongoing assistance and support of the public to serve the community in which we all live and undertakes its activities without fear or favour. The AFP, the Commissioner says, rejects in the strongest terms any suggestion to the contrary. The AFP makes all its operational decisions independently based on experience, operational priorities on the law. The AFP's primary obligations are to ensure the safety and security of the Australian community and enforce the rule of law.
For Wills is warned.
The AFP prides itself on its independence and integrity and has a proven track record of those values while operating under the remit of 8 individual Prime Ministers and their governments since it was founded in 1979. Mr Speaker, it's about time the Leader of the Opposition disowned all of these disgraceful, reckless attacks on the integrity of the AFP by his members. And Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition should reflect on the fact that the Australian Federal Police, the men and women of that force, keep us safe. They are independent, they uphold the rule of law, and it's about time Labor did too.
Just before I call the member for Kennedy, I've just got some business to get through here. I warned the member for Ballarat yesterday, again today. No, I'm not accepting sorry. We don't do that. It's not a negotiation. You can leave under 94A. Just before I call the member for Kennedy, I'd like to make a very special welcome to the Honourable Peter Watson, the Speaker of the West Australian Legislative Assembly. And I call the member for Kennedy.
Financial services. In May 2014, I raised the issue of skyrocketing North Queensland insurance premiums. ACCC figures show northern premiums rising 80% in 5 years. With 400% increases, North Queensland is the lead contributor. With pre-cyclone Tracy old building code buildings all gone, this discrimination cannot now be justified. 2006 Cyclone Larry damages 1.5, 2011 Yasi only 800 million. When will the minister establish an authority to underwrite exceptional circumstances, providing the platform for yarding profiteering insurers?
Applause of relief. The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services.
I very much thank the member for Kennedy for his question, and I note his very strong interest in ensuring that Queenslanders pay appropriate insurance premiums and not $1 more than they are required to. And I'm happy to report to the Parliament, Mr Speaker, that this is exactly why the Australian Government has directed the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission to monitor prices, costs and profits in the insurance market in Northern Australia in relation to home, contents and strata insurance. Now, this commenced on the 1st of July 2017 and it will continue for 3 years. The government has committed $7.9 million to this inquiry and we will very closely monitor the findings of the surveillance that the ACCC conducts. The government will consider whether there is any need to take action in improving insurance affordability as a result of this very important inquiry.
The member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Energy. Will the minister update the House on the government's action to guarantee affordable and reliable energy for hard-working Australians and businesses, including in my home state of Queensland? And how does this compare with alternative approaches?
The Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Fairfax for his question. He comes from the great state of Queensland, Mr Speaker, but it's not a great state for energy policy, Mr Speaker, because as a result of the actions of the Labor state government, the Palaszczuk government. They have given the green light to the government-owned generators to game the system, and as a result, Queenslanders have paid on average 30% more for their wholesale electricity prices in the first 5 months of this year than the other states in the national electricity market. And it's been left to the Turnbull government to do the heavy lifting on energy policy, Mr Speaker. And through the National Energy Guarantee, we have delivered a credible, workable, practical policy that will deliver more reliable and affordable power, Mr Speaker. No subsidies, no taxes, no trading schemes, and it's been broadly welcomed by business, big and small, Mr Speaker, as being a way forward for this country. And it builds on the work that we've done in other areas of energy policy, passing legislation just a couple of weeks ago to stop the gaming by the networks of the poles and wires, Mr Speaker. The work that we've done with the retailers to ensure that hundreds of thousands of Australians save hundreds of dollars a year on their retail bill. And the work that we've done with the gas companies, Mr Speaker. As a result of the Prime Minister's intervention, we will not see a shortfall in the domestic market as was expected for 2018 and 2019. And I can inform the House today that APLNG have announced that they will provide 41 additional petajoules to the domestic market starting from next week, Mr Speaker. That's the equivalent of enough gas to power 2 million homes across New South Wales, an enormous amount of extra gas that has been delivered as a result of the Turnbull government's intervention. Now, Mr Speaker, it's been days since we've had a question from those opposite on energy. Days. Absolutely days. They've gone silent. The member for Port Adelaide's turned into the Marcel Marceau of Australian politics. The Leader of the Opposition said that when it comes to energy policy, time for talk is over. I didn't know that he'd take his own advice, Mr Speaker. I didn't know he'd take his own advice. And the reason being is he knows, under the Labor Party's policy, Australian households will be $300 a year worse off. Shame on the Labor Party. Shame on the Labor Party for their energy policy. It's time they realise that the way forward for this country to get reliable and affordable power is to listen to the experts, as they asked us to do, to give us a bipartisan consensus to ensure that the National Energy Guarantee becomes a reality. It's time the Labor Party got on board.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister expect Australians to believe that the media reported yesterday an allegation that the Employment Minister's office had leaked the raids? The Employment Minister then came to the Prime Minister and said that she herself had not personally leaked the raids, and the Prime Minister, with all his training as a cross-examiner, didn't think to ask if her office had leaked the raids, which was the only allegation that had been made. Did the Prime Minister in fact ask this question, or had he already been advised it was safer to not ask?
The member's time has concluded. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member for Watson does his best at innuendo, but he's not a particularly talented cross-examiner. Mr. Speaker, here are the facts. Here are the facts. The minister.
Members on my left.
The minister gave me the assurance I told the House about yesterday that she'd not disclosed the matter to journalists before the raid, and that was the assurance that she gave me. Subsequently, as honourable members know, her media advisor admitted of his wrongful conduct, Sydney, and he's resigned. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand why the Labor Party want to focus on the wrongful conduct of a ministerial staffer, focus on that rather than why $100,000 of AWU members' funds were given to an organisation that wants to put most of those members out of a job. That is the question. That's the question. And they want to know why, when the Registered Organisations Commission asked for documentary information from the AWU, they weren't provided. They want to know about that too. But, Mr Speaker, what I think Australians will find it very hard to understand
will leave under 94A.
is why the opposition, at this time of economic challenges, at this time of high electricity prices, why Labor has now no interest in asking about the National Energy Guarantee, no interest in talking about measures that will improve employment, no interest in economic issues. They're only interested in one thing, and that is to protect union officials from transparency and accountability. And, Mr Speaker, the law is catching up with those traditions of the trade union movement, thanks to the hard work and dedication of the Employment Minister, Senator Cash.
Member for Shortland, and I remind the member for Wills and the member for Lyons that they've been warned. The member for Marinara has the
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Agriculture, Water Resources and Northern Australia. Will the Deputy Prime Minister advise the House why the government's National Energy Guarantee is crucial to the success of hard-working Australians in the agriculture sector, including those in my electorate of Marinara? Is he aware of any alternative approaches?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and it's great to have all their attention for once. I'd like to thank the Marino for his question, and he understands full well how important energy prices are and how important it is to keep blue-collar workers in a job, especially in the meat processing industry, especially in the abattoirs. And some of the abattoirs in his electorate, like John D at Warwick and Western Meat Exporters at Charleville. And I remember actually getting the deal through for Western Meat Exporters in Charleville when I worked for QIDC. It was a big deal then, $8 million. Now employs hundreds of people. Great outcome for Charleville. Or Hall Egg Farms at Milnbaron, and all the irrigators along the Darling Downs and out St George. Electricity prices are terribly important. And we're now seeing at places such as St George that they're going from electricity back to diesel. Now, why are they doing that? They're doing that because power prices under the Queensland Labor government are hopeless. What's happened is Queensland now has the dearest power prices in Australia. And that is a remarkable effort for Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk, because she had to get around South Australia to get the dearest power prices, and South Australia were the best in the world, best in the Western world. So what we have to do in our policy, what we are doing is making sure we get clear transparency so people can change between accounts. We're making sure that the gas prices, and at Wallumbilla, they're now the spot price is down between $7 and $8. Wallumbilla also in the members' electorate. And at one point in time, Darren Lockyer played there. And we're also making sure that we keep coal fire burning, because if we don't keep that coal fire burning, you're not going to have any blue-collar workers. And they're laughing because they don't believe in blue-collar workers anymore. They're laughing because they don't believe in blue-collar workers anymore. They don't. They believe that blue-collar workers are now politically incorrect, and they're doing everything in their power to turn themselves into a party that represents the inner suburbs and other sections of the workforce, but no longer blue-collar workers. No longer blue-collar workers. And there's very little experience in blue-collar work on that side of the chamber. Very, very few of them have ever actually been labourers. There are very few labourers in the Labor Party. They've given up on labourers in the Labor Party, and they've also given up on making sure that we look after the dignity of the people in the weatherboard Nine, in towns such as Auguthella, in Yurlo, in Eromanga, in Birdsville, in Gundawindi, in Kingaroy, that we look after these people who are doing it tough on the peripheries of society. We make sure that they have the dignity of affordable power in their house so they can keep themselves cool in summer and warm in winter, and make sure that we don't create second-class citizens of a section of Australian society. This is something that I know in the National Party and I know in the Coalition we hold closest to our heart. Every time we look at policy, we are saying, how does this affect those at the margins of society? How do we make sure there's dignity in these people's lives? We are not there for those who are more interested in the privilege. You are certainly not interested.
Has concluded. Members on my left. Members on my right, the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's answer. Is it now the position of the government that staff can mislead their ministers, the ministers can mislead the parliament, and that the minister will remain entirely unaccountable? How are your ministers meant to be running the country when they can't even run their office?
The Leader of the House will cease interjecting. The Minister for Social Services will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, the honourable member knows very well that the minister is accountable. A minister is accountable for what she says, and her obligation is to speak the truth. She was misled, as she said. She was misled, as she said, and once her staffer told her the truth and made the admission that he'd done the wrong thing, she corrected the record. She acted entirely properly. And that stands in stark contrast to the actions of the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker. It's not a question of his staff. It's a question of the people that own him. He is a wholly owned subsidiary of the CFMEU. He is a wholly owned subsidiary of a trade union, a militant trade union, cashed up and powerful, that defies the law. Defies the law, treats judges, courts, fines as of no account. And of course he has delivered for them. He sent messages of joy and comradeship to the rally that John Setka addressed, in which he attacked the Australian Federal Police as a political henchman. Exactly the same criticism that his own industrial relations spokesman, the member for Gorton, made about the Federal Police. The Leader of the Opposition has disowned neither of them. He does not dare. They own him. He has no ability to stand up to that union, despite being called to account by Bob Hawke, by Kevin Rudd. Bob Hawke said that when he was Prime Minister, he had the courage and the commitment to disaffiliate the BLF. He deregistered the BLF. He had the courage to do that. What does the Leader of the Opposition do? He just takes more money from them. He just gets the old receipt book out and takes more money from them, just as he took money when he was the Secretary of the Union from one employer after another and did not tell his members about it. Did not tell his members about it. And
the member for Lindsay is warned.
To change the law, to do no more than oblige unions to disclose to their members what the money they were getting from employers, and to take that money only for legitimate purposes, transparent, openness. You'd think everyone would sign up to that. Not the party opposite. They are not the party of the workers. They're the party of the workers' representatives.
The member for Moreton will leave under 94A. He's lucky he's not named. Member will leave. The member for BOWMAN.
Thanks, Speaker. A question to the Minister for Health. I'm asking the Minister to outline to the House why an affordable and reliable energy supply is important for health services in Queensland. That includes both Mater and Redland hospitals in my electorate of BOWMAN. Minister, is the Minister aware of any threats that may jeopardise the delivery of services for my patients?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for BOWMAN. He's not just a great local advocate for hospitals such as Mater and Redlands. He's also a lifelong medical professional. He is, in fact, an eye surgeon, and to this day he continues to hold pro bono clinics in eye health care, really something extraordinary. And one of the things he knows is that Labor loves higher electricity prices, and those higher electricity prices are a threat to patients. They're a threat to hospitals such as Mater and Redlands. They are a threat to every hospital in Queensland. And that's why we're introducing a national energy guarantee. That is why only today you're seeing the benefits of the Prime Minister and the Minister for Energy's work in pushing the gas companies to make more gas available, which will bring down the price of gas in this country, and in fact is already so doing. And we're also seeing the benefits of the abolition of limited merits review, another government initiative. These are things which are aimed fairly and squarely at bringing down the cost of electricity and energy and bringing down the impact of that on hospitals, not just in his electorate, not just in Queensland, but right around Australia. And he has also done something that no person, not one person on the Labor side has done. He voted against a carbon tax. And he voted against that carbon tax because what Labor did is introduce a carbon tax that had a $2,425 impact on each hospital bed per annum in Queensland. That was the impact of the carbon tax on Queensland Treasury's own modelling, their own modelling. And right now, he is fighting against the Queensland government's impact in terms of gouging with regards to their own state-owned enterprises and electricity, and the 50% RET, which we have seen in Queensland, which we have seen is posing blackout threats this summer. Now, his next task is to join all of us, which he's committed to, in fighting against Labor's attack on hospitals around Australia. Their 50% renewable energy target, national pledge, is going to have an impact of $300 per year compared with our approach. That's $300 per family per year, and that is going to hurt each and every hospital. So the member for BOWMAN isn't just an advocate for better health care. He isn't just a practitioner of better health care. He's an advocate for hospitals which don't face the impact of Labor's assault on their electricity prices. He's going to continue to fight against Labor's bad practices, and so will we.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. During the Utegate scandal, the Prime Minister spoke about misleading the Parliament, saying the following: "That is an offence that should result in the dismissal or resignation of a minister. It is perfectly clear." Given it is perfectly clear that the Employment Minister misled the Senate 5 times, why won't the Prime Minister, under his own standards, sack the Employment Minister?
Member for Jagga. The member for Gilmore. The Prime Minister has the
The honourable
floor.
member knows very well that the Minister for Employment, Senator Cash, gave evidence in the course of estimates in which she described the facts of the matter as known to her at the time. When her staffer admitted to having done the wrong thing, she corrected the record in light of that admission. That is precisely what she should have done, and she did it with an integrity that the honourable member might reflect has been all too rarely shown by those who claim to represent and lead trade unions in this country.
The member for CALARE.
The question is to the Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment. Will the minister outline to the House why it is important that the union movement be run honestly on behalf of hard-working Australian families and businesses? Is the minister aware—
Members on my left. The member for CALARE.
Is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for CALARE for his question. Mr Speaker, yesterday on Radio National, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition on the Fran Kelly program, in answer to a question about the issue that we've been discussing the last couple of days, said the government set up a Royal Commission, the Hayden Royal Commission, which found nothing. The government set up the Hayden Royal Commission, which found nothing, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, saying the Royal Commission found nothing is like saying that in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue and found nothing. He found nothing, didn't come across in North America, Mr Speaker. What would finding something look like? Finding the lost city of Atlantis, Mr Speaker, would that have been finding something? The Ark of the Covenant, would that have been finding something? Member for Sydney? What a ludicrous statement. Mr Speaker, the Royal Commission, let me remind the Labor Party what some of the things the Royal Commission found, Mr Speaker. The Royal Commission, as a consequence of the Royal Commission, have had 10 successful prosecutions, 8 criminal convictions, 2 civil penalties.
Member for Bendigo.
11 matters are currently before the courts in criminal and civil matters. 119 referrals have been made to the DPP because of the Hayden Royal Commission, because of illegal activity. Because of the Hayden Royal Commission, the Australian Building and Construction Commission has been re-established. Because of the Hayden Royal Commission, the Registered Organisations Commission has been established. The corrupting benefits legislation has been passed by both houses of parliament. Before the House now is the Ensuring Integrity Bill and the proper use of workers' benefits bills, Mr Speaker. That's all happened because of the Hayden Royal Commission, which the Deputy Leader of the Opposition says found nothing, Mr Speaker. The problem with the Labor Party, their relationship with the union movement is they are addicted to the rivers of gold that the union movement funnels to the Labor Party for their election campaigns, Mr Speaker. And if the Leader of the Opposition had any integrity, he would turn his back on the CFMEU rivers of gold that hold up his leadership. Because the problem is, Mr Speaker, and the Australian public get it, that if the Leader of the Opposition isn't strong enough to stand up to the CFMEU, he certainly isn't strong enough to stand up for the nation's interests at home or abroad, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the reason that the Prime Minister hasn't sacked his Employment Minister because the Prime Minister is in this up to his neck?
I've got a problem with that question. It's very short, and the last part about "in this" might be very obvious to members of the opposition what they're referring to, but I don't believe it conforms with standing orders. And I tell you what, if you want to watch the rest of it back in your office, second Deputy Speaker, I can accommodate you. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, I move that so much of the standing
Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. That's quite out of order. I'm ruling on the question, whether it's in order or not, and I called you on the basis that you were going to do what you normally do and argue with me that the question was in order. No, Manager of Opposition Business, resume his seat. This will be very simple. The question's out of order. I'm going to the next question. The member for Latrobe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the Minister update the House on the work the Australian Border Force has undertaken with the Australian Federal Police to protect Australian families and the integrity of our borders?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I think I know how this is going to be bookended now. I think the Leader of Government Opposition Business went a little bit too early, didn't he? He often stuffs up just at the wrong moment. But there you go. Now, Mr Speaker, I want to thank the member for Latrobe for his question, because he has the greatest respect for our law enforcement officers across the country. He supports the Australian Federal Police. He supports very strongly the Australian Border Force. And so, Mr Speaker, does this government. This government has absolute and complete faith in our law enforcement agencies because they are independent, and they are proud of the fact that they are independent. And Mr Speaker, we have stood up counter-terrorism unit officers at our international airports because we recognise the significant threat from terrorists, both here and those that might seek to come to our country as well. We have seen 884 people stopped by the CTU officers since 2014, and those officers attached to the Australian Border Force work hand in glove with the Australian Federal Police at our airports around the country, Mr Speaker. Imagine how those federal police officers would have felt in the last 24 hours when their integrity has been questioned by those opposite, Mr Speaker. Imagine those officers who stand there every day to protect us.
Members on my left.
They are led by an exceptional leader in the Commissioner, Andrew Colvin. Imagine how he feels and his officers feel when it has been suggested uphill and down Dale by those members on the front bench, those members opposite, when they have questioned the integrity of the Australian police. It is a disgraceful episode, but, Mr Speaker, I'm sorry to say it's not without precedent. It's not without precedent because the fact is that for many years union leaders in this country have seen themselves above the law. So when the Leader of the Opposition interjected earlier that the Prime Minister was up to it—
The Minister will just pause for a second. The member for Lyons has been warned numerous times, which is a regular occurrence. That's good. He can anticipate my next sentence. That's even quicker. Thank you. The Minister has the call.
That's it. Improvement in the IQ level already, Mr Speaker. And,
no, the Minister will withdraw.
I withdraw, Mr Speaker. I withdraw. So, Mr Speaker, when the Leader of the Opposition said to the Prime Minister before that he was up to his neck in it, I'll tell you who's up to his neck in it. It's this bloke here. The Australian public are onto this Leader of the Opposition. You know, throwing all these red herrings out will not distract from the fact that the Australian Federal Police, of their own volition, decided to raid the AWU because they are worried about the integrity of this Leader of the Opposition. And he has formed. He has fronted the Royal Commission. He has been part of a union movement that has been proven to be corrupt in the courts. They have paid penalties over a number of years.
Has concluded. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. I move that so much of the standing orders be suspended as would prevent the Manager of Opposition Business from moving the following motion immediately.
The Leader of the House.
1. Notes A. Yesterday morning, the media aired an allegation the Employment Minister's office had leaked the raids, which allowed television crews to turn up to the raids before the police did. B. By midday yesterday, the Employment Minister had 5 times denied that her office had been involved in leaking the raids. C. At the Prime Minister's question time briefing yesterday, attended by the Employment Minister and the senior media advisor who has now resigned for leaking the raids, the Prime Minister, according to the government's account, failed to ask a single question about the involvement of the Minister's office in leaking the raids. D. At 6:10 p.m, Alice Workman of BuzzFeed reported that journalists received a leak about the raids from the Employment Minister's office before the raids began. E. At 7:30 p.m, after the truth had been exposed, only then did the Employment Minister finally admit that she had misled the Senate on 5 separate occasions. And F. During the Utegate scandal, the now Prime Minister himself said that misleading the Parliament is an offence that should result in the dismissal or resignation of a minister. It is perfectly clear. And 2. Therefore, calls on the Prime Minister to A. Sack the Employment Minister for breaching ministerial standards, repeatedly misleading the Senate, and B. Explain to the House his involvement, his office's involvement and his government's involvement in this serious matter where the publicly stated version of events does not add up. The Australian Federal Police upholds the law, but this government does.
The Leader of the House has the call.
Mr Speaker, you've got to build momentum for
the
these
Leader of the House will resume his seat. No, the Leader of the House resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
The Australian Federal Police upholds the rule of law, but the government does not. This began with a complete abuse of power.
Will resume his seat. The Minister for Energy Environment.
I move that the member no longer be heard.
The question is the member be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Members on both sides. Deputy Prime Minister, member for Grayndler. Member for Grayndler. Just remind members, I haven't removed anyone under 94A during a division yet. Lock the doors. Order. The question is that the manager of opposition business be no further heard. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the members for Murray and Gray. Tell us for the ayes. And the members for Lawler and MacArthur. Tell us for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 72, noes 64. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. Is the motion seconded? The member for Grayndler.
I second the motion. It's time to cash out this minister. She has misled Parliament.
The Leader of the House has moved the member for Grayndler be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. It would be helpful if members were to remain in their seats during this successive division unless they did not vote in the previous division, or if they're changing their votes, they must report to the tellers.
Yeah, we don't have to. We know it's 75. Yeah. This way. No, it's the same as last time. We don't need to count that. David, us.
Lock the doors. Question is the member for Grayndler be no further heard. Members must remain in their seats unless they're changing their vote or did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers.
Yeah.
No. It's just.
Order. The result of the division is ayes 72, no 64. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question is that the motion be agreed to. The member for Gorton.
The Prime Minister must show some leadership and sack
the Leader of the House.
The motion be put.
Question is the motion be put. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute. I appoint the same tellers as the previous division. And as always, be useful if members were to remain in their seats during this successive division, unless they did not vote in the previous division, or if they're changing their votes, in which case they should report to the tellers.
I've got to sign it here. Michael.
Lock Lock the doors. Order. The question is that the motion be put. Members must remain in their seats during this successive division unless they're changing their vote or did not vote in the previous division, in which case they must report to the tellers. Order. The result of the division is ayes 72, noes 64. The question is therefore resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that the motion be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No. I think the noes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 1 minute, but the tellers will do a full count. Lock the doors. The question is that the motion moved by the Manager of Opposition Business be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Murray and Gray tellers for the ayes, and the honourable members for Lawler and MacArthur tellers. The honourable members for Lawler and MacArthur tellers for the ayes, and honourable members for Murray and Gray tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 62, noes 74. The question is therefore negatived. Members just take their places. Members just take their places. No, it's to this side. You know, the call, it's not a question of who's first, it's not an athletic endeavour. The call goes to this side.
Nice try, Brendan. Nice try. It's not your chance, man.
No. I don't want to be narky, but we go one side, then the other.
How long have you been doing that for?
116 years. The member for Banks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Revenue and Financial Services. Will the minister update the House on action the government is taking to protect the retirement savings of hard-working Australians and improve transparency of the system? How does this compare with alternative approaches?
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services.
I thank the member for Banks for his question, and he knows that the Turnbull government has introduced very comprehensive reforms to Australia's compulsory superannuation system to protect members and to protect members' money. The government is determined to see the very highest standards of accountability, transparency and independent oversight of Australia's $2.3 trillion superannuation industry. Let's be very clear. Australian governments, successive governments, have compelled hard-working Australians to set aside around about 10% of their wages into superannuation funds. They deserve to know what is happening to their money. They must be confident that the people who are put in charge of these funds are acting only in the interests of members. Questions were asked of the former RBA Governor and Industry Fund Director Bernie Fraser in a recent Senate committee inquiry about a payment made by Australian Super to the AWU in the 2006-07 financial year, specifically described by the AWU in its 2007 AEC declaration as a donation. The $27,500 payment was made at the same time that the Leader of the Opposition was the AWU National Secretary and also a Director of Australian Super, alongside Bernie Fraser, current Labor Senator Doug Cameron and former Labor MP Greg Combay. Now, coincidentally, a similar-sized donation was subsequently made by, yes, the AWU to the Leader of the Opposition's political campaign in the seat of Maribyrnong. But it was only when this payment from Australian Super to the AWU came under scrutiny in June, following reports by the Australian newspaper, that the AWU resubmitted its original AEC declaration, changing the very nature of the AWU payment from donation to other receipt on the 15th of June this year, some 10 years later. What role did the Leader of the Opposition have in deciding that a payment should be made to his own union when he was both the Director of Australian Super and the National Secretary of the AWU? What steps did the Leader of the Opposition take to fully disclose his conflict to the board? And how did he and fellow Australian superannuation directors satisfy themselves that this was an appropriate use of members' money? We know that superannuation is not the government's money, not the employer's money, not the executive's money, not the trade union's money, and not the Labor Party's money. It is the members' money.
The Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice.
Thank you, Prime Minister.